In 1958, a seasoned pilot took off from a desert airfield on a clear blue morning and never came back. No wreckage, no distress call. Just silence, swallowed by the New Mexico sky. For 6 decades, his disappearance became local legend, until a hiker found a plane buried in the canyon rock with the pilot inside, alive and untouched by time. What began as a miracle soon turned into a nightmare, as investigators realized he hadn't just survived, he'd come back carrying something that should never have left the sky. Because some flights don't end where they land, they end where time breaks. Silver Ridge Municipal Airport, New Mexico. July 18, 1958, 6:15 a.m. The sun hadn't yet crested the Gila Mountains when Everett Granger's boots hit the tarmac of Silver Ridge Municipal Airport. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold, but the air still held the previous night's chill. He pulled his leather flight jacket closer, his calloused fingers running over the worn collar as he made his way across the quiet airfield. The Cessna 310 sat waiting, its aluminum skin gleaming dull silver in the early light. Everett approached with measured steps, each footfall marking time like a metronome. He'd done this walk thousands of times since coming home from the war. Pre-flight checks were as natural as breathing. But today, his shoulders carried an invisible weight. From the shelter of Hangar 3, 12-year-old June watched her father, her small hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee she'd made him. She knew every move of his inspection routine by heart. Right wing first, then left, then tail assembly. The way he'd tap each rivet line with his knuckles, listening for the solid ring of security. How he'd crouch to check the landing gear, his fingers testing the hydraulic lines with the same gentleness he used to braid her hair. "Daddy?" June called out, her voice carrying across the empty tarmac. She jogged over, careful not to spill the coffee. "You forgot breakfast." Everett turned, and for a moment his face softened. "There's my girl." He accepted the thermos, but his usual morning smile seemed stretched thin. "You should be in bed, June Bug." "Couldn't sleep." June shuffled her feet on the concrete, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. "Where are you really going?" Everett's hand stilled on the thermos. "Told you last night. Quick cargo run to Arizona, back by supper." "But you never take passengers on cargo runs." Her father's eyes flicked toward the terminal building, then back to the pre-flight checklist in his hand. "Sometimes things change, sweetheart. Business is business." Inside the small terminal, a figure moved behind the frosted glass. June caught her father watching it too, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Promise you'll be careful?" June pressed, hearing the tremor in her own voice but unable to stop it. "Like you always say about weather over the mountains?" Everett knelt down, putting himself at eye level with his daughter. His hands, steady as always, gripped her shoulders. "June Alice Granger, have I ever broken a promise to you?" She shook her head. "Then trust me when I say I'll be home for supper. Your father's got too many miles in the air to let a little cargo run get the better of him." He pulled her close, and June noticed he held on longer than usual, his embrace almost fierce. At the terminal door, a man in a dark suit emerged, carrying a slim briefcase. Bobby Martinez, the morning desk clerk, trailed behind him with an anxious expression that didn't match his usual easy manner. "Captain Granger?" Bobby called out, his voice carrying a note of forced cheerfulness. "Your passenger's ready, sir." Everett straightened, squeezing June's shoulder one last time. "That's my cue, June Bug. Mind your Aunt Sarah until I'm back." "Yes, sir." June watched as her father approached the terminal, noting how his spine straightened, his shoulders squaring like they did in old photos from his military days. The man in the suit said nothing, merely nodding as he handed Everett a sealed manila envelope. June saw her father study it for a moment before tucking it into his flight jacket's inner pocket. Bobby hovered nearby, clipboard in hand. "Weather report's clear all the way to Arizona, Captain, but, He glanced at the suit-wearing passenger, then back to Everett. "Don't see a flight plan filed yet." "Special clearance," Everett replied, his voice clipped. "Direct from regional command. You'll get the paperwork after wheels up." Bobby's eyebrows rose, but he said nothing more, just initialed the clipboard and retreated to his desk inside. The pre-flight routine continued with mechanical precision. June watched from her spot near the hangar as her father helped the silent passenger board, then did one final walk-around. She noticed he spent extra time checking the radio antenna, running his fingers along its length as if searching for imperfections. At 6:45 a.m., the Cessna's twin engines coughed to life, their drone echoing off the hangar walls. June pressed her hands against her ears, feeling the familiar vibration in her chest. But something was different today. The sound seemed heavier, more ominous. Through the cockpit window, she saw her father's profile as he ran through his instrument checks. For a moment, just before he began taxiing, he turned and gave her a final wave. June waved back, forcing herself to smile even as an unfamiliar anxiety gnawed at her stomach. The Cessna rolled down Taxiway Charlie, its wheels leaving dark marks on the morning-damp concrete. June counted the seconds until it reached the runway threshold. 17, same as always. The engines revved higher, and the aircraft began its takeoff roll, gathering speed until its wheels lifted cleanly from the ground. From the control tower, Jerry Wilson's voice crackled over the radio. Silver Ridge Tower to November 37 Charlie, you are cleared for heading 270. Maintain 3,000 feet until clear of the military restriction zone. Roger that, Tower. November 37 Charlie, maintaining 3,000. Everett's voice came back, steady and professional. Then, almost as an afterthought, Jerry, if you see my June around later, remind her about that supper promise. Will do, Captain. Good flying. June watched the Cessna bank west, its silver wings catching the morning sun. She stayed rooted to her spot until the aircraft was just a glint against the cloudless New Mexico sky, then disappeared entirely behind the mountains. 7 minutes later, Jerry's voice crackled over the tower radio again. November 37 Charlie, Silver Ridge Tower, radio check. Silence. November 37 Charlie, please respond. More silence. Captain Granger, do you copy? Finally, Everett's voice came through, but something was wrong. The usual clarity was replaced by static and an odd, hollow quality. Tower, this is 37 Charlie. We're at 3,000 feet heading 270, but there's some kind of... The transmission cut off mid-sentence. In the control tower, Jerry frantically adjusted his radio dials. Captain Granger? Everett, do you copy? Nothing but empty air answered back. Jerry reached for the red phone, the one connected directly to the FAA's regional office. His hands shook slightly as he dialed, eyes fixed on the western horizon where Everett's plane had vanished. This is Silver Ridge Tower, he said when the line connected. We've lost contact with a civilian aircraft. November 37 Charlie. Captain Everett Granger, piloting. He paused, listening. No, sir, no distress call. He just stopped transmitting. Below, on the tarmac, June still stood watching the empty sky, her father's coffee thermos clutched forgotten in her hands. The morning sun had fully risen now, turning the mountains to gold and casting long shadows across the airport. But the shadow growing in June's heart was darker still, and somehow she knew it would be a very long time before she saw her father again. The first search plane took off before noon. June watched from the airport's chain-link fence as the yellow Piper Cub climbed into the cloudless sky, banking west along her father's last known heading. Two more followed within the hour, their engines droning steadily as they formed a loose search pattern over the desert. Sheriff Dan Hawkins' cruiser pulled up to the terminal at 12:45 p.m., kicking up dust from the access road. He found June exactly where she'd been since morning, fingers locked through the metal fence, still clutching her father's thermos. June. The sheriff's boots crunched on gravel as he approached. Your Aunt Sarah's worried sick. Says you won't come home. Can't. June didn't turn around. What if he comes back and nobody's here? The sheriff sighed, settling his broad frame against the fence beside her. Got the whole Civil Air Patrol up there looking. Best pilots in New Mexico. If your daddy's plane's anywhere in that desert, they'll find it. Inside the terminal, phones had been ringing steadily since mid-morning. June watched Bobby Martinez rush between desks, his usual easy smile replaced with tight-lipped concentration as he coordinated with search teams. Need to ask you some questions, June. Sheriff Hawkins pulled out a small notepad. Anything unusual about your father's behavior lately? Past few days, maybe weeks? June's fingers tightened on the fence. He was worried. Worried how? Different than normal weather worry. He checked the locks twice last night. Never does that. She turned to face the sheriff. And there was a car, black sedan, parked across from our house 3 nights in a row. The sheriff's pencil paused. You see who was in it? No, but Daddy saw them. That's when he started acting strange. Strange how? Yesterday morning, he was in his study for hours, burning papers. June's voice dropped. He told me there was a job he didn't want. Said sometimes a pilot has to fly even when his gut says no. Sheriff Hawkins wrote quickly, then glanced toward the terminal. Through the windows, June could see Bobby arguing with someone on the phone, his free hand making agitated gestures. "What about the passenger?" the sheriff asked. "You see him before?" June shook her head. "Just today. Dark suit, carried a briefcase, didn't talk much." "And the cargo?" "Just an envelope, manila-colored. Daddy put it in his inside pocket." The sheriff opened his mouth to ask another question, but a commotion from the terminal drew their attention. A black government sedan had pulled up, and two men in Air Force uniforms were striding through the door. Behind them came a third man in a dark suit, similar to the one Everett's passenger had worn. Bobby Martinez met them at the desk, but his usual friendly greeting died on his lips when the suited man flashed some kind of identification. June couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Bobby's face drain of color. He nodded repeatedly, then disappeared into the back office. "Stay here," Sheriff Hawkins muttered, straightening his uniform. He walked briskly toward the terminal, intercepting the military men just as Bobby returned with an armful of logbooks and papers. The discussion was brief. June watched the sheriff's shoulders stiffen as the suited man spoke, occasionally gesturing toward the western horizon. When Bobby tried to interject something, one of the Air Force officers cut him off with a sharp hand motion. Finally, Sheriff Hawkins nodded and stepped aside. The military men gathered the paperwork and headed back to their car, the logbooks and flight manifest disappearing into the trunk. As they drove away, June noticed their sedan had no license plates. The sheriff returned looking troubled. "June, honey, I need you to think careful now. Did your daddy ever mention anything about military work, special flights, anything classified?" "No, sir." But even as she said it, June remembered fragments of late-night phone calls, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. But sometimes he'd get calls, late calls, would go flying after dark and not talk about where. More vehicles were arriving now. State police cars, their cherry lights flashing silently in the afternoon sun. A white van marked Civil Air Patrol Coordination parked near the hangars, and men in orange vests began unloading radio equipment. At 2:30 p.m., the first search planes returned to refuel. June listened as the pilots reported to the growing command. Post. No signs of wreckage, no smoke, no emergency signals. The desert had swallowed her father's plane without a trace. "Miss Granger?" A woman in a Civil Air Patrol uniform approached, carrying a clipboard. "I'm Lieutenant Ross. We need to know what color clothing your father was wearing this morning. Any distinctive features about his plane? Recent modifications?" June recited the details mechanically. Navy blue flight jacket. White shirt. The small dent in the Cessna's left wing from a bird strike last spring. The fresh paint on the tail number. As the afternoon wore on, more search planes took off and returned. Maps were spread across folding tables, grid patterns marked and checked off. June heard fragments of radio calls. "Nothing in Sector 7. Checking the canyon approach. Negative visual contact." At 4:15 p.m., a ground team radio crackled with excitement. "Base, this is Team Charlie. We've got something strange in the canyon, some kind of shimmer in the air, like heat waves, but different. Request immediate aerial verification." June's heart leaped, but the hope died quickly. The aerial team reported nothing unusual, just normal thermal distortion from the hot rocks. The shimmer, whatever it was, had vanished. Sunset painted the mountains copper and purple as the last search plane circled back to Silver Ridge. June hadn't moved from her spot by the fence. Her Aunt Sarah had come and gone twice, pleading with her to come home, but June refused. She couldn't leave, not yet. The airfield lights clicked on automatically, their yellow glow creating pools of light on the empty tarmac. In the distance, coyotes began their evening chorus, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. The sound reminded June of something her father once said about desert nights. "The wild things know what's out there, Junebug. They sing to warn us." One by one, the search teams packed up their equipment. The command post van drove away, orange vests stowed until morning. Bobby Martinez locked up the terminal, pausing only to squeeze June's shoulder before heading home. "June." Sheriff Hawkins' voice was gentle behind her. "Time to go home, honey. Search'll start again at first light." But June kept her vigil at the fence, eyes fixed on the darkening western sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the mountains and the deepening night, her father had vanished into empty air. And somehow, watching his last known heading felt like the only connection she had left. The evening wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and creosote. June shivered, pulling her sweater tighter. Her father's thermos lay forgotten at her feet, the coffee long since gone cold. In the growing darkness, the airfield seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the drone of familiar engines that didn't come. The radio tower stood silent, its red warning light pulsing steadily against the stars. And still June stood, a small figure against the vast desert night, watching and waiting as the last search planes returned empty. The Silver Ridge Community Center hadn't seen this many people since the winter dance. Wooden folding chairs scraped against linoleum as townsfolk filtered in, their murmurs echoing off cinder block walls. June sat in the back row, watching familiar faces file past. Pilots, mechanics, shopkeepers, all wearing the same grim expression. Sheriff Hawkins stood at the podium, flanked by FAA officials and a man June recognized from the Air Force. The overhead fluorescents cast harsh shadows on their faces, making them look older, more severe. After 2 weeks of extensive searching, Hawkins began, his voice carrying through the packed room. Covering over 5,000 square miles of terrain, we've found no trace of Captain Granger's aircraft or any survivors. June's Aunt Sarah squeezed her hand. The room felt suddenly airless. The FAA investigation indicates that Captain Granger encountered severe weather conditions at approximately 10,000 feet. The Air Force officer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. Analysis suggests pilot error during instrument navigation, likely resulting in spatial disorientation and subsequent crash. A mechanic near the front stood up. "That's garbage. Ev knew those mountains better than anyone." Weather was clear that day. "The official report," the officer continued louder, "shows a developing storm system moved through the area. We have therefore classified this as a weather-related incident. Captain Granger is presumed deceased." The words hit June like physical blows. Presumed deceased. Just like that, they were erasing him. "What about the passenger?" someone called out. "Who was he?" The Air Force officer shuffled his papers. No passenger was listed on the flight manifest. This sparked an outcry. Bobby Martinez shot to his feet. "I saw him board myself. Dark suit, briefcase." "The official manifest shows Captain Granger flying solo," the officer repeated firmly. "Any other observations are speculation." June watched Bobby's face redden. He opened his mouth to argue further but caught the sheriff's warning look and slowly sat back down. The meeting dissolved into procedural details. Insurance forms, death certificates, legal proceedings. June barely heard them. Her attention drifted to 2 elderly men seated a few rows ahead, both wearing VFW caps decorated with service pins. "Just like Thompson's flight," one muttered. "Same damn thing." "Arclight protocol," the other replied, so quietly June had to strain to hear. "Flight path lockdown, just like before." "Shouldn't talk about it," the first veteran warned, glancing around nervously. "You know what happened to—" A sharp cough from behind made them both straighten and fall silent. After the meeting, June walked past her father's hangar. Yellow police tape crossed the doors, and a new padlock gleamed on the chain. Through the narrow windows, she could see men in dark suits methodically boxing up equipment and papers. "They ain't right about this, Junebug." She turned to find Walt Cooper, the airport's head mechanic, leaning against his truck. Walt had worked with her father for 15 years, knew every aircraft on the field. "Your daddy was the best pilot I ever seen," Walt continued, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "No way he got lost in weather. Something else happened up there." "The passenger," June said. "Did you see him that morning?" Walt nodded slowly. "Seen him before, too. About a week earlier, talking to your father by the fuel tanks. Ev looked scared. Never seen him scared before." He glanced toward the hangar, then back at June. "Listen, there's something you should—" "Mr. Cooper?" A sharp voice cut through the evening air. 2 men in suits were approaching, their shoes crunching on gravel. "We need to speak with you about some maintenance records." Walt's face tightened. He stubbed out his cigarette and straightened up. "Go on home, June, but stop by my shop tomorrow morning, early, before anyone else gets here." The next morning, June arrived at the maintenance shed just as the sun was creeping over the mountains. The door was unlocked, but Walt wasn't at his usual workbench. "Walt?" she called out, stepping inside. Tools hung in their familiar places. The coffee pot sat cold and unused. Something caught her eye, a cardboard box on Walt's desk, her father's name scrawled across the top. Beside it lay a note. "June." These belong to your daddy. Keep them safe. I'm sorry I can't explain more. Walt. She opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside were dozens of old flight logs, maintenance records, and what looked like personal journals. At the bottom, she found a small tape recorder, the kind pilots used for voice notes during long flights. June pressed play. Static crackled, then her father's voice filled the small shop. October 12, 1957, testing new route coordinates for special delivery. If something happens, follow the coordinates. They're in the back of the blue logbook, but don't. The recording cut off abruptly. June dug through the box until she found a blue logbook, its cover worn smooth with age. But before she could open it, voices outside made her freeze. Car doors slammed. Footsteps approached. She quickly closed the box and slipped out the back door, clutching her father's legacy to her chest. As she hurried away, she heard men's voices from inside the shed. Cooper's gone. Left sometime in the night. Any sign of the records? Place is cleaned out. He knew we were coming. June didn't stop running until she reached home. She hid the box under her bed, her heart pounding with the weight of secrets she didn't yet understand. Walt was gone. Her father was missing. And somewhere in those old logs lay coordinates to what? Her fingers brushed the rough cardboard of the box, feeling the edges of the mystery her father had left behind. Whatever truth lay hidden in those pages, she knew finding it would change everything. The Silver Ridge Sentinel arrived on doorsteps 3 weeks after Everett's disappearance. June spotted it from her bedroom window, thin and folded, more advertisement than news these days. She watched Mrs. Peterson next door bend down to retrieve her copy, scanning the front page before shaking her head and walking back inside. June waited until the street was empty before darting out to grab their own paper. The obituary sat at the bottom of page 3, wedged between a notice for a church bake sale and classified ads for used farm equipment. Granger, Everett James, 40, presumed deceased following aviation incident on July 18, 1958. Distinguished Waliabutu veteran and local pilot. Survived by daughter June, no services planned per family request. 3 sentences. Her father's entire life reduced to 3 bland sentences that said nothing about who he really was. Nothing about his laugh that filled rooms. Nothing about how he taught her to read weather patterns in the clouds or name constellations on clear desert nights. Nothing about the mysterious flight that took him away. Sarah, her father's sister, found June at the kitchen table, still staring at those 3 sentences an hour later. "I've made some decisions," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from her. She wore her nurse's uniform, creased from a long hospital shift. "You can't stay here alone, June. Not with—" She gestured vaguely at the empty house. "I'm not alone," June protested. "I have you, and Walt—" She stopped, remembering Walt's vanishing act, another person gone without explanation. "I work double shifts most days," Sarah sighed. "And after what happened to your father, this town isn't safe anymore. Not for you." June's grip tightened on the newspaper. "What do you mean, not safe?" But Sarah was already pulling papers from her bag. Train tickets, school registration forms, letters filled with unfamiliar addresses. "Your mother's cousin Margaret lives in Boston. She's agreed to take you in. Good schools there, better opportunities." Sarah's voice took on a rehearsed quality. "You'll start fresh, away from all this." "Boston?" June felt the word like a physical blow. "But what about the investigation? Dad's things? We can't just—" "The investigation is over," Sarah cut in, her tone sharper than usual. "The police, the FAA, they've all moved on. Maybe it's time we did too." June wanted to argue, to remind her aunt about the strange men who'd emptied the hangar, about Walt's warning and the box of logs hidden under her bed. But something in Sarah's expression stopped her. Fear. The same fear she'd seen in her father's eyes before that final flight. The next few days passed in a blur of packing and paperwork. Neighbors brought casseroles they barely touched. The house filled with boxes labeled storage or Boston in Sarah's neat handwriting. June watched her childhood being sorted and sealed away, piece by piece. The morning of departure arrived cold and gray. The train station sat at the edge of town, a small brick building with peeling paint and empty benches. Sarah parked in the gravel lot, helping June with her suitcase. Margaret will meet you in Chicago for the transfer, she explained, smoothing June's collar for the 10th time. Then it's straight through to Boston. You have the schedule? June nodded, patting the envelope in her coat pocket. Next to it, folded small and secret, was a page torn from her father's blue logbook. She hadn't decoded the coordinates yet, but she wasn't leaving them behind. The platform slowly filled with other passengers. A young mother with 3 children, an elderly couple, 2 businessmen reading identical newspapers. June scanned their faces, wondering if any of them knew about her father, about the secrets hiding in the desert sky. Movement near the ticket office caught her eye. A man in an Air Force uniform stood partially hidden by a pillar, watching the platform. Even at this distance, she recognized him. The same sharp features, the same wire-rimmed glasses she'd seen at the crash investigation meetings. "Sarah," June whispered, tugging her aunt's sleeve. "That man." But when she looked again, he was gone. Only an empty shadow remained by the pillar. The train arrived in a cloud of steam and brake noise. Sarah hugged her tight, whispering final instructions and promises to write. June climbed aboard, finding her assigned seat by a window. As the train shuddered to life, June pressed her face to the glass. Sarah stood alone on the platform, growing smaller as the station slid away. Beyond her, the mountains rose against the morning sky. The same mountains that had swallowed her father's plane, that held answers in their silent canyons. The station disappeared around a bend. June sat back, one hand touching the folded logbook page in her pocket. She thought about Walt's warning, about the whispered words, "Arc-Light Protocol," about all the questions still unanswered. They could send her to Boston. They could pack away her father's memory in storage boxes and newspaper obituaries, but they couldn't stop her from searching for the truth. However long it took, whatever it cost, she would find out what happened in those desert skies. She owed her father that much. The train picked up speed, carrying her east toward a city she'd never seen. Behind her, Silver Ridge and its secrets faded into the distance, but the promise she made to herself grew stronger with every mile. Someday, she would return. Someday, she would understand. Through the window, the New Mexico landscape rolled past. Mesas and arroyos, cacti and scrubland. Somewhere out there, her father's plane lay hidden. Somewhere out there, the truth waited to be found. The conductor moved through the car, checking tickets. June handed hers over mechanically, her mind still on the man at the station. Had he been watching her all along? What did they think a 12-year-old girl could do? More. Passengers boarded at the next stop. A woman in a floral dress took the seat beside June, immediately pulling out knitting needles and yarn. The steady click-click of metal provided a rhythm to June's thoughts as the train pressed onward. She pulled the newspaper from her bag, reading the obituary one last time. 3 sentences. Such a small space for such a big mystery. Carefully, she folded the paper and tucked it away with the logbook page. Every clue mattered, no matter how small. The woman beside her made sympathetic noises, misreading June's expression. "First time traveling alone, dear?" June nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Let them think she was just another scared child leaving home. Let them think she'd forget about Silver Ridge and its vanishing pilots. Let them think whatever they wanted. She knew better. She was her father's daughter, after all. And like him, she knew how to keep secrets close, how to watch and wait and plan. Boston wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of a much longer journey. Mountains gave way to plains as the train thundered east. June leaned her head against the window, watching America slide past in a blur of fence posts and telephone lines. Tomorrow she'd wake up in Chicago. The day after, Boston. But part of her would always remain in Silver Ridge, searching the sky for answers. The letters always came back the same way. June had memorized the format: official letterhead, polite dismissal, signature block. This one, from the Department of Defense, sat on her desk at the Boston Public Library, where she worked as a research assistant. Dear Miss Granger, thank you for your inquiry regarding the 1958 incident. After thorough review, we regret to inform you that all files pertaining to this matter remain classified under National Security Directive. She folded it carefully, adding it to a manila folder already thick with similar responses. 10 years of letters, each one a dead end. The FAA claimed their records were lost in a file transfer. The Civil Air Patrol referenced a warehouse fire. The Air Force didn't bother responding anymore. Outside her apartment window, the Boston spring painted the streets in cherry blossoms and fresh green leaves. So different from the stark New Mexico desert where she'd grown up. June checked her calendar. July 15th, 1968. 3 days until the anniversary. She pulled out her journal, bound in worn leather, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. Every memory of her father, every detail she could recall, preserved in ink before time could steal them away. Dad always checked the oil himself, even when Walt insisted he'd done it. "Trust but verify," he'd say, wiping his hands on that red shop rag he kept in his back pocket, the way he'd whistle Blue Skies while doing pre-flight checks. His coffee cup, ceramic, chipped on the rim, always black with 2 sugars. June touched the words gently, as if they might fade beneath her fingers. Some memories were already growing dim, like photographs left too long in sunlight. Did his eyes crinkle at the corners when he smiled? Or was that something she'd invented over the years? The decision to return to Silver Ridge hadn't come easily. Her Aunt Sarah still lived there, sending dutiful Christmas cards and occasional updates about town gossip. But June hadn't been back since that day at the train station. Couldn't bear to see the empty hangar, the quiet house, all the spaces where her father should have been. But 10 years felt important. A milestone that demanded acknowledgement. She packed light. 1 small suitcase, her journal, the folder of correspondence. The flight to Albuquerque made her hands shake. She'd avoided planes since her father's disappearance, choosing trains and buses instead. But somehow this felt necessary, facing the sky that had taken him. The rental car smelled of artificial pine and hot vinyl. June drove west from Albuquerque, watching the landscape shift from city to desert. Familiar mountains rose on the horizon, their shadows stretching across the valley floor. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as Silver Ridge came into view. The town had shrunk somehow, or maybe her memories had made it larger. Main Street dozed in the afternoon heat, many storefronts empty or boarded up. The movie theater where she'd spent Saturday matinees was now a furniture store. Mel's Diner had become a Woolworth's. She drove slowly past her old house, now painted a different color with unfamiliar curtains in the windows. Someone had removed the tire swing from the cottonwood tree. New life continuing in old spaces, as if the past had never happened. The municipal airport lay at the edge of town, separated from civilization by 2 miles of scrubland. Even from a distance, June could see the changes. The windsock hung limp and faded. Weeds pushed through cracks in the runway concrete. The control tower stood empty, its windows dark. She parked near the chain-link fence, now topped with rusty barbed wire. A sign declared, "Airport closed, no trespassing," in sharp red letters. Through the fence, she could see her father's old hangar, its metal walls weathered to a dull gray. The numbers were still visible. Hangar 7. The fence had a gap near the bottom, worn smooth by years of trespassers. June hesitated only a moment before slipping through. The runway stretched before her, empty and silent under the vast New Mexico sky. Heat waves shimmered off the concrete, making the distance waver like a mirage. Her footsteps echoed as she walked, counting the familiar distance. 200 yards to the spot where she used to watch takeoffs, 300 to where the fuel trucks once parked, 400 to where her father's plane had lifted into that perfect blue morning, never to return. The bouquet of desert wildflowers felt small in her hands. Indian paintbrush and yellow columbine gathered from the roadside. She placed them carefully on the sun-warmed concrete, watching their colors bright against the gray. "I'm still waiting, Dad," she whispered. The words disappeared into the empty air. No answer came from the silent hangars or the indifferent sky. Only the wind moved, stirring the flowers' petals and carrying away 10 years of questions. June stood for a long moment, letting the desert sun warm her face. Somewhere overhead, a jet drew white lines across the blue. The world had moved on, filling the air with new planes and new pilots. But here, in this abandoned place, time felt frozen, still holding the echo of that last transmission, that final unfinished sentence. She touched the runway one last time, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingers. Then she turned away, walking back through the heat waves and memories, leaving the flowers to fade in the eternal desert afternoon. The gap in the fence seemed smaller as she slipped back through. Her rental car waited, offering escape back to her ordered Boston life of library cards and careful research. But as June drove away, watching the airport recede in her mirror, she knew the truth hadn't changed. Somewhere between earth and sky, in that moment when the radio went silent, answers still waited to be found. And she would keep searching, keep writing letters, keep remembering. Because some mysteries didn't end just because the world moved on. The mountain shadows lengthened across the valley. In the distance, Silver Ridge's water tower caught the late sun like a signal mirror. June drove east, carrying her father's memory and 10 years of questions back toward the city where she now lived, but had never truly called home. The autumn sun hung low over the Gila wilderness, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. 3 drone enthusiasts, Mark Chen, Delia Rodriguez, and Tom Baker, picked their way carefully along a narrow game trail, following the GPS coordinates of their crashed DJI Mavic. "Should be just ahead," Mark said, checking his phone screen. The 23-year-old software developer had organized this weekend expedition to capture aerial footage of the wilderness for his YouTube channel. "Signal's getting stronger." Delia, a local high school science teacher, wiped sweat from her forehead. "Remind me again why we had to fly so close to the cliffs?" "Best angles," Tom replied, adjusting his camera backpack. The retired photography instructor had been mentoring Mark on drone cinematography, though maybe not worth losing a $3,000 drone over. They'd been hiking for nearly 2 hours since watching their drone clip a jutting rock face and spiral down into the maze of ravines below. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, loose scree slopes and steep drop-offs hidden behind drought-resistant scrub. "Hold up," Mark called out, pointing to a glint of white plastic among the rocks. "There it is." The drone lay in pieces at the base of a cliff wall, its carbon fiber arms snapped and camera gimbal crushed. But, as they approached to collect the wreckage, Tom noticed something odd about the rock face beside them. "Look at this," he said, running his hand along what appeared to be gouged stone. "These aren't natural marks. Something big scraped against this cliff." Delia stepped closer, her geologist's eye analyzing the patterns. "These are impact marks, but old ones. The weathering suggests decades of exposure." Mark's drone forgotten, they followed the scarring along the cliff face. It led them to a narrow gap, barely visible unless you stood at just the right angle. The ravine beyond was deep and shadowed, its walls rising 40 feet on either side. "Should we check it out?" Mark asked, already pulling out his phone's flashlight. Delia hesitated. "We're pretty far off trail. No one knows we're out here." "Just a quick look," Tom said. "Those marks have me curious." They squeezed through the gap single file, their boots crunching on loose stone. The ravine curved sharply to the left, and as they rounded the bend, all 3 stopped dead in their tracks. There, wedged between the narrow walls, sat an airplane. It was a small twin-engine craft, its silver fuselage dulled by years of exposure but remarkably intact. The wings had been sheared off by the ravine walls during what must have been a controlled descent, but the cabin section appeared undamaged. Rocks and debris had partially buried the tail, but the registration numbers were still visible. N7726C. That's a Cessna 310, Tom whispered, his aviation hobby kicking in. "Early model, too, probably late 50s. Delia approached slowly, examining the wreckage. "This is impossible. There's no rust, no major deterioration. It looks like it crashed yesterday." Mark was already documenting everything with his phone camera. "How did no one find this? The Civil Air Patrol must have searched these canyons dozens of times over the years." "The ravine entrance is almost invisible from above," Tom replied, "and these walls would have blocked any ELT signal." They worked their way closer to the cockpit, careful of the unstable ground. The windscreen was intact but clouded with dust and age. Tom wiped a small section clean with his sleeve and peered inside. He jerked back so suddenly he nearly fell. "There's someone in there." Mark and Delia rushed forward, clearing more of the glass. In the fading daylight, they could make out a figure slumped forward in the pilot's seat, still strapped in by the shoulder harness. "Oh my God," Delia breathed. "We need to call search and rescue right now." But Mark was already reaching for the cockpit door handle. "They could be alive. We have to check." The door creaked open with surprising ease. The cabin air that escaped was stale but not decomposed. Mark reached in carefully and pressed 2 fingers to the pilot's neck. His eyes went wide. "There's a pulse. It's steady." The pilot was a man in his early 40s, wearing what looked like a vintage military-style flight uniform. His face was peaceful, as if he'd simply fallen asleep at the controls. A leather flight bag lay in the co-pilot's seat, along with a sealed manila envelope. "This can't be real," Tom said, examining the man's clothing. Look at his watch. It's a period-correct Bulova. His uniform, his shoes, everything's authentic 1950s. Delia had found the aircraft's registration paperwork in the side pocket. According to this, the plane was registered to a Captain Everett Granger out of Silver Ridge Municipal Airport. Registration date. She paused, double-checking the document. July 1958. Mark was checking the pilot's vital signs again. Breathing's normal, no visible injuries. It's like he's in some kind of suspended animation. The man's chest rose and fell steadily. His skin was warm to the touch, with healthy color in his face. There were no signs of aging, no indication that 61 years had passed since his plane disappeared into these cliffs. Tom pulled out a small field medical kit from his camera bag. We need to get help here fast, but we can't leave him alone. Delia, you're the fastest hiker. Take my satellite phone and call emergency services. Mark and I will stay with him. Delia nodded, already pulling up the GPS coordinates on her phone. I'll mark the trail back to the road. What should I tell them? Tom looked at the unconscious pilot, then at the pristine vintage aircraft around them. Tell them we found a crashed plane with a survivor. Let the professionals handle the rest of it. As Delia hurried back through the ravine, Mark continued documenting everything with his phone. The instrument panel showed all gauges frozen at their last readings. A coffee thermos in the cup holder still felt warm to the touch. A folded newspaper on the floor was dated July 18, 1958. The sun had nearly set, casting the ravine in deep shadow. Tom set up his LED camera light, illuminating the cockpit. As they waited for rescue, he studied the pilot's face, noting the complete absence of age lines or weathering. Mark, he whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. I think this guy's from the past. The pilot's chest continued its steady rise and fall, oblivious to the impossible gap in time. In the distance, they could hear Delia's voice echoing off the canyon walls as she made the emergency call. Soon this hidden ravine would be swarming with authorities, and their incredible discovery would change from private mystery to public sensation. But for now, in the gathering darkness, 3 drone enthusiasts sat watch over a man who had somehow slipped through time's fingers, waiting to see what would happen when he finally opened his eyes. The emergency response to Redstone Regional Hospital was unlike anything Dr. Sarah Chen had seen in her 15 years of emergency medicine. State police cruisers formed a protective corridor around the ambulance. Men in dark suits appeared before the EMTs even finished their handoff. And the patient, a man in pristine 1950s aviation wear, showed no signs of the exposure or dehydration expected after decades in the wilderness. Vital signs stable, Dr. Chen announced, reading from the monitor. Blood pressure 120/80, temperature 98.6, oxygen saturation 100%. She turned to her resident. Pull up his blood work. The results made no sense. Complete blood count normal, metabolic panel perfect, no signs of organ failure, muscle breakdown, or the chronic conditions common to men his apparent age. Even his teeth showed no decay. Doctor, the resident called out, frowning at his tablet. The DNA results just came back. They ran it twice to confirm. And? It's a match for Everett Granger, the missing pilot from 1958. Dr. Chen studied their patient's face. Square jaw, weather-lined skin that spoke of years in cockpits, but nowhere near the age he should be. His military haircut was still regulation crisp, as if he'd just stepped out of a barber's chair during the Eisenhower administration. A tall man in a government windbreaker appeared at her elbow. Dr. Chen, Agent Wallace, Department of Defense. We'll need all test results and imaging forwarded to our medical team. He's my patient, she said firmly. I need to understand his condition before... This is now a matter of national security. Wallace's tone left no room for debate. But there's someone else who needs to see him first. The agent stepped aside, revealing an elderly woman in a beige cardigan being helped by a nurse. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and despite her frail appearance, her spine remained straight as steel. Her hands trembled as she gripped her walking cane. Mrs. Harrison, Wallace said gently, though I believe you still go by Ms. Granger. June Granger nodded, her eyes fixed on the man in the hospital bed. Dr. Chen watched emotions flash across the old woman's face. Hope, fear, disbelief. We verified his identity through DNA testing, Wallace continued, and we have a recent photo taken at the crash site. He held out a smartphone displaying an image of Everett Granger, unconscious but utterly unchanged from his 1958 pilot's license photo. June swayed on her feet. The nurse quickly guided her to a chair while Dr. Chen checked her pulse. "It's not possible," June whispered. "I'm 73. He's younger than my children would have been." "Ms. Granger," Dr. Chen said softly, "would you like a moment with him? He's been sedated for transport, but he's showing signs of waking." June nodded, her fingers white-knuckled around her cane. The nurse helped her to the bedside, where she carefully sat in the visitor's chair. For a long moment, she just stared at Everett's face, reaching out once to touch his hand before pulling back. "His wedding ring," she said. "It's still there. Mother's ring that she left him." Dr. Chen checked the cardiac monitor as it registered a slight increase in heart rate. Everett's eyelids flickered. "He's waking. Up," she announced. "Everyone but immediate family. Please step out." The suits and uniforms filed out, though Agent Wallace lingered by the door. June leaned forward, her aged hand finally settling on her father's young one. Everett's eyes opened slowly, blinking against the fluorescent lights. His gaze wandered the room in confusion before settling on June's face. A small frown creased his brow as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing. "Where's June?" His voice was hoarse but clear. "Is she safe?" June's fingers tightened around his hand. "Daddy," she whispered. "It's me. I'm June." Everett tried to sit up, but Dr. Chen gently pressed him back. "Please stay still, Captain Granger. You've been through quite an ordeal." "No," he said, looking desperately between them. "My daughter's 12. She was at the airfield when I—" His voice trailed off as he took in the modern medical equipment, the digital displays, June's aged face. "What happened? What's wrong with everything?" "Captain," Dr. Chen said carefully, "what's the last date you remember?" "July 18th, 1958, he answered without hesitation. "I was flying a charter to Arizona. There was weather moving in, so I climbed above the cloud deck and then—" He squeezed his eyes shut. The sky looked wrong, like it was folding in on itself. June was crying silently, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "We searched for you. For weeks, then months. They told me you were dead." Everett stared at her, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. He reached up with a trembling hand to touch her face, tracing the years carved there. "Little June," he breathed. "My God, what did they do to us?" The heart monitor's steady beeping increased as Everett's pulse climbed. He looked wildly around the room, taking in the plastic tubing, the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, the smartphone on the bedside table. "What year is it?" he demanded. Dr. Chen met June's eyes, receiving a small nod. "It's 2019, Captain Granger. You've been missing for 61 years. The color drained from Everett's face. His hands clenched the bedsheets as he struggled to process the impossible truth. "But I haven't—" He looked down at his unchanged body in horror. "You haven't aged a day," June confirmed. "You're exactly as I remember you, exactly as you were that morning at the airport." Everett's breathing grew rapid and shallow. The monitor's alarm began to sound as his blood pressure spiked. Dr. Chen quickly adjusted his IV drip, adding a mild sedative. "Try to stay calm," she urged. "Your body has been through something we don't understand yet. You need to rest." "The envelope," Everett said suddenly, fighting the sedative. "In my flight bag. Did they find it?" Agent Wallace stepped forward. "It's secure, Captain, along with the rest of the aircraft." "No," Everett tried to sit up again. "You don't understand. It has to be delivered. They said there would be consequences." His voice slurred as the medication took effect. June stroked his hand, humming an old lullaby she remembered from childhood. Slowly, Everett's eyes drifted closed, though his face remained troubled even in sleep. Dr. Chen checked his vitals again as June wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He'll sleep for a few hours. It's better to let him adjust gradually." June nodded but didn't move from her father's side. "I used to dream about finding him," she said quietly. "All those years. But not like this. Never like this." Agent Wallace cleared his throat. "Ms. Granger, we'll need to debrief you both once he's stabilized. There are questions about his flight, about what he might remember." "No." June's voice was steel. "My father just lost 61 years in what feels to him like minutes. He needs time to process this. We both do." Wallace opened his mouth to argue, but Dr. Chen cut him off. My patient needs rest and minimal stress. You can have your answers when he's medically cleared." The agent withdrew, speaking quietly into his radio. Outside the room, more suits were arriving, setting up a perimeter. Dr. Chen ordered the nursing staff to minimize entry and restrict all visitors. June remained in her chair as the room slowly emptied, her eyes never leaving Everett's face. She looked both older and younger somehow. A child reunited with her father, a woman confronting impossible truths. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," Dr. Chen said softly. June nodded absently, still holding Everett's hand. As Dr. Chen reached the door, she heard the old woman begin to speak, her voice gentle as she told her sleeping father about all the years he had missed, all the life that had passed while he was lost in that folded sky. The desert air hit June like a furnace blast as she stepped off the plane at Albuquerque International Sunport. Her hands trembled as she gripped her wheeled carry-on, not from age, but from the weight of what awaited her at the military medical facility 40 miles north. Agent Wallace met her at baggage claim, his dark suit pristine despite the July heat. "Ms. Granger, I trust your flight was comfortable?" June nodded, studying the man who'd been coordinating between her and the various agencies involved. He was younger than her youngest former students, yet he spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd been managing impossible situations for decades. "How is he?" she asked, following Wallace to a waiting black SUV. "Stable, confused. The doctors say his vital signs are remarkably normal for someone who—" He trailed off, apparently unsure how to describe her father's condition. "For someone who hasn't aged in 61 years?" June finished for him. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a foreign language. The drive north was mostly silent. June watched the familiar New Mexico landscape roll past, mesas and scrubland unchanged since her childhood. The facility appeared suddenly, rising from the desert like a mirage, a sprawling complex of white buildings surrounded by high fences and security checkpoints. Wallace led her through a series of corridors, each requiring different key cards and clearances. The air grew cooler, sterile. June's sensible shoes squeaked against polished floors as they approached a private wing. "He's been asking for you," Wallace said, pausing outside a door marked only with a number. "But I should warn you, he's still processing everything. The temporal displacement—" "He's my father," June interrupted. "Whatever state he's in, I need to see him." The door opened to a large, well-lit room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital chamber. There were comfortable chairs, a small kitchenette, even artwork on the walls. And there, standing by the window, was Everett Granger. June's breath caught. She'd seen the recent photos, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her father, exactly as she remembered him. The same dark hair with its stubborn cowlick, the same strong shoulders beneath a borrowed dress shirt, the same hands that had once lifted her onto his shoulders at air shows. He turned at the sound of the door, and June saw his eyes widen with recognition and disbelief. "Little June," he whispered, then stopped, clearly struggling with the reality before him. June took a step forward, then another. Her cane tapped softly against the floor, a sound that made Everett flinch. "Hello, Daddy," she said, her voice breaking slightly. They stood there, father and daughter, separated by mere feet and impossible decades. June saw him taking in her appearance, the silver hair, the lines around her eyes, the slight stoop of age. His own face was exactly as it had been the morning he disappeared, 40 years old, barely a line around his eyes. "They told me," he said finally, "about the year, about how long. But seeing you—" He reached out as if to touch her face, then pulled back. "You look so much like your mother now." June smiled through tears. "That's what Uncle Henry used to say, before he passed." "Henry's gone?" Everett's face fell. "Of course he is. Everyone must be—" "Would you like to sit?" June gestured to the chairs. "There's so much to tell you, so many years to cover." They settled across from each other, Wallace discreetly withdrawing to give them privacy. June studied her father's familiar yet strange face, noting how his hands fidgeted, a nervous habit she remembered from childhood. "The doctors say you're healthy," she began. "All your tests came back normal." Everett nodded. "They keep saying that. Normal for 1958, they mean. They can't explain why I haven't." He gestured to himself. "They ask me the same questions over and over, about the flight, about what happened in the clouds." "What did happen?" June leaned forward. "They never found wreckage. The official report said pilot error, but I never believed it. Because you knew me better. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I was a good pilot, June. One of the best. What happened up there? He shook his head. It wasn't natural. Tell me, she urged. Please, I've waited so long to know. Everett stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The flight started normal. Clear skies, good visibility. My passenger was quiet, military type, though he wasn't in uniform. We were heading southwest when I saw the clouds. What kind of clouds? Like nothing I'd ever seen. They formed a wall, appeared out of nowhere. I tried to climb above them, but... He pressed his hands against the glass. The sky looked wrong, like it was folding in on itself. I felt this sensation, like time was stretching and twisting. Then everything went dark. June pulled her bag closer. I kept your old flight logs, she said. After they cleared out your hangar, a mechanic, Jim Whitaker, gave me a box of your things. Everett turned sharply. You have my logs? She nodded, withdrawing a worn leather notebook. I've read them so many times, trying to find clues. There was something odd in the entry from the week before you disappeared. About Protocol 7, and coordinates that didn't match any known. Don't! Everett crossed the room in 2 quick strides, his voice urgent. Don't read that out loud. Those codes, they were never meant to be spoken. June stared at him. What codes? Daddy, what were you involved in? He sank into his chair, suddenly looking tired despite his unchanged face. Things we didn't understand, experiments with the sky itself. They told us it was about beating the Russians to space, but it was more than that. They were trying to bend something fundamental. They? Who were they? I can't... He rubbed his temples. There are gaps. Things I remember and things I don't. But the envelope... His head snapped up. The envelope I was carrying. Did they find it? Did anyone open it? June shook her head. It was still sealed when they found you in the plane. The authorities have it now. Relief flooded Everett's face, followed quickly by fear. It has to stay sealed. Promise me, June. No matter what happens, no matter who asks, that envelope can never be opened. Why? What's inside it? Coordinates, he whispered. To somewhere that isn't supposed to exist, somewhere they built in the desert that could tear holes in. He stopped, pressing his hands to his ears as a high-pitched whine filled the room. The lights flickered. June's digital watch went dark. Outside in the hallway, she heard hurried footsteps and urgent voices. Daddy? She reached for him, but he waved her back. It happens sometimes, he said through gritted teeth. When I think too hard about where I was. The doctors say I'm causing electromagnetic disturbances somehow. The whine faded, the lights stabilized. June's watch blinked back to life, though the time was wrong. You were gone so long, she said softly. I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. But now that you're back, she gestured, helplessly at the impossible gap between them, her aged hands, his unlined face. My little girl, Everett said, his voice thick with emotion, all grown up while I was lost in that twisted sky. He finally reached out and took her hand, his grip strong and warm and achingly familiar. I'm so sorry, June, so sorry I left you alone. You're here now, she said, squeezing his hand. Whatever happened, whatever's still happening, we'll face it together. But Everett's eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the window's desert view. Together, he echoed, for however long they led us. The first drone appeared 3 days after June brought Everett home to her small ranch house outside Silver Ridge. It hovered just beyond her property line, a dark speck against the New Mexico sky that vanished when she tried to photograph it. Probably just kids, she told herself, but drew the curtains anyway. By sunset, there were 3 of them. June's internet cut out that evening while she was showing Everett how to use her laptop. The screen flickered and died mid-sentence. I'll call the company, she said, reaching for her landline. Dead tone. Her cell phone showed no signal, despite having full bars moments before. Everett stood at the kitchen window, watching the drone's red lights blink in the gathering darkness. They're monitoring the frequencies, he said quietly, testing the boundaries. Who is? He didn't answer, just pressed his forehead against the cool glass. The gesture was so familiar, the same way he used to steady himself after rough flights, that June's throat tightened. The next morning, someone knocked at her door. A man in khakis and a polo shirt held up an ID badge. Census Bureau, he said with a too-wide smile. Just following up on some demographic data. June knew every census taker in Silver Ridge. This wasn't one of them. I'll need to see better identification, she said through the screen door, noting his clean shoes. Too clean for someone who'd been walking door to door in the desert. Of course. He reached into his back pocket. The movement exposed a shoulder holster. June slammed and locked the door as the man's smile vanished. She heard him rattling the handle, then heavy footsteps on her porch. By the time local police arrived, responding to her 911 call, he was gone, leaving only scuff marks on her door and a business card that led to a disconnected number. That night, the nightmare started. June woke to Everett's shouts from the guest room. She found him tangled in sheets, his face sheened with sweat. The White Room, he gasped when she shook him awake. I was back in the White Room, the machines, humming, voices talking about temporal displacement and subject stability. He grabbed her arm. They had others, June, other pilots. I could hear them through the walls. It was just a dream, she said, but her voice shook. No. He sat up, fully alert now. It was memory. They're starting to come. Back fragments of where I was. What they did to me. Who are they? I don't... He pressed his hands to his temples. It's like trying to hold smoke, but we need to see the crash site. Maybe being there will help me remember. June hesitated. The authorities cordoned it off. Since when has that stopped a Granger? A flash of his old smile, the one that used to precede their greatest adventures. They left before dawn, taking June's old Jeep up service roads into the Gila wilderness. The drone surveyor's original coordinates led them to a narrow canyon, its walls streaked with mineral deposits that gleamed like frozen lightning. But where the Cessna had been, they found only fresh bulldozer tracks and packed earth. The entire area had been scraped clean, as if the crash site had never existed. Look at this. Everett knelt, picking up a scrap of metal no bigger than a quarter. Part of my wing number. Everything else, just gone. June scanned the cliff faces. They worked fast, but why? What are they hiding? Not what, Everett murmured. When? He stood slowly, tucking the metal fragment into his pocket. We should go. They'll be watching this place. They drove to Maggie's Diner in Silver Ridge, seeking normalcy and coffee and pie. The breakfast crowd was thin, a few truckers, some retirees, a solitary man in a worn denim jacket reading yesterday's paper. June excused herself to use the restroom. When she returned, the man in denim had taken her seat. Ma'am, he said without looking up from his coffee. Got a message for you. I'm not interested in... You shouldn't have brought him back. The man's voice was flat, emotionless. There are places in this world that act like doors. Some of them only open one way. Your father flew through one of those doors in '58. Now that he's back... He stood, leaving a $5 bill on the table. Things are going to start breaking. Reality has rules, ma'am. We broke them getting him out. There's a price for that. Who are you? June demanded. Who do you work for? But the man was already walking away, his reflection rippling strangely in the diner's plate glass window. By the time June made it to the parking lot, he was gone. She found Everett still at their booth, staring at a napkin where the man had drawn a series of symbols, identical to markings in his old flight logs. June, he whispered. I remember these. They were on the walls of the White Room. They're not writing, they're equations for folding space. Outside, 3 black SUVs rolled slowly past the diner, their windows tinted mirror dark. In the sky above Silver Ridge, drones circled like patient vultures, waiting. June spread Everett's weathered flight log across her kitchen table, its pages yellow and brittle under the morning light. Coffee cups sat forgotten as father and daughter hunched over the leather-bound book, their shadows merging on the wall behind them. Here, Everett pointed to an entry dated July 15th, 1958, 3 days before his disappearance. I remember writing this, but the details, they're blurry. June adjusted her reading glasses, studying her father's precise handwriting. Weather, clear altitude, 12,000, course, 270. Special notes, met with Colonel Hayes, re-AC delivery, coordinates provided, standard protocol suspended. AC, June asked. Arclight cargo, Everett said slowly, as if the words were surfacing from deep water. That's what Hayes called it, said it was classified. Need to know. June pulled out her laptop, opening a folder labeled Cold War Research. After Everett's disappearance, She'd spent decades collecting fragments of information, declassified documents, newspaper clippings, conspiracy forums. Most led nowhere. But now, Project Arclight, she read. First mentioned in a 1957 funding request from White Sands Missile Range. Everything else is redacted, but look. She turned the screen toward Everett. The project head was Colonel James Hayes. Everett's hand trembled as he touched the screen. That's him, the man who gave me the envelope. He closed his eyes. Tall, wire-rimmed glasses, always smoking those Turkish cigarettes. There's more. June clicked through her files. In 1962, a physicist named Dr. Marcus Chen published a paper on temporal displacement theory before suddenly withdrawing it. He disappeared a week later, but not before mentioning something called the Arclight Protocols. Everett rubbed his temples. The White Room. There was a Chinese man in a lab coat. He would stand behind glass, taking notes while they ran tests. Tests? June's voice softened. They'd put me in this chamber. Metal walls covered in symbols, like the ones in my log. Everett flipped to the back pages where he'd drawn strange markings in the margins. They said they were navigation aids, but they weren't like any coordinates I'd ever seen. June studied the symbols. They reminded her of quantum notation, loops and angles that seemed to fold in on themselves. She'd seen similar markings in her research, usually dismissed as hoaxes or artistic interpretations. Wait here, she said, hurrying to her office. She returned with a printout from an obscure physics blog. Does this look familiar? Everett's face went pale. The blog post showed nearly identical symbols, photographed on a wall in an abandoned military facility in Nevada. The caption read, Suspected temporal navigation markers? Posted by Dr. Sarah Chen. No relation to Marcus Chen. June quickly found Dr. Chen's contact information. The physicist turned blogger agreed to a video call, her excitement barely contained when she saw Everett's flight log. These aren't random doodles, Dr. Chen explained, her image flickering on June's laptop. They're mathematical expressions of fourth-dimensional space-time coordinates. My uncle, Marcus Chen, was developing a navigation system that could... She hesitated. This sounds crazy, but it could theoretically plot courses through temporal distortions. Time travel? June asked skeptically. More like time displacement. The military was obsessed with finding ways to give our pilots tactical advantages during the Cold War. If you could shift a plane just a few seconds out of sync with normal time, you'd be invisible to radar, Everett finished. Untouchable. Exactly. Dr. Chen leaned closer to her camera. But the equation suggests something more ambitious. They weren't just trying to shift seconds. They were attempting to create stable temporal corridors, passages where time moved differently inside than outside. June felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. And they used pilots to test it. Test pilots, Everett corrected quietly. The color had drained from his face. That's what I was. Hayes never intended me to deliver anything. The envelope, the cargo run to Arizona, it was all cover for something else. He pressed his hands flat against the table to stop their shaking. I wasn't supposed to know, just fly the route they gave me and... His voice cracked. God, how many others were there? Dr. Chen's expression turned grave. According to my uncle's notes, at least 7 pilots entered temporal corridors between 1957 and 1959. Official records list them all as training accidents or disappeared in bad weather. She paused. You're the only one who came back. June reached for her father's hand. His skin felt cool, almost too smooth for a man his apparent age. The envelope you were carrying is still sealed, Everett finished. In my jacket pocket. They never found it because you never crashed, June said. You just stopped. For 61 years. Everett stood abruptly, going to the closet where his old leather flight jacket hung. The envelope was still there, yellowed but intact, the flap secured with a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar symbol. He placed it on the table with trembling hands. All this time, I thought I was delivering it somewhere, but I was wrong. His voice hardened. I was the delivery. Dr. Chen leaned forward until her face filled the laptop screen. Captain Granger, before you open that... But Everett had already broken the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in more quantum symbols, arranged in a precise grid, and below them, a set of coordinates that didn't match any modern map. Navigation codes, Dr. Chen breathed. But these aren't for plotting a course through normal space. They're temporal coordinates, a flight plan through time itself. June watched her father trace the symbols with a fingertip, his expression distant. Hayes said it was a routine cargo run, he murmured. Just follow the flight plan, maintain radio silence after checkpoint 3, and don't deviate no matter what I saw. His hand clenched into a fist. I was the cargo. They turned me into their test subject without even telling me. Dr. Chen was typing furiously off-screen. These equations, they're incredible. They're not just plotting a course, they're creating a bubble of altered space-time around the aircraft. The pilot would experience time differently inside while the outside world... She stopped. Oh my God. What is it? June asked. According to this, the temporal differential wasn't supposed to be 61 years. It was supposed to be much longer. Dr. Chen looked up, her face pale. Captain Granger, I don't think you were meant to come back at all. I think you were supposed to keep flying until... The video feed cut to static. June and Everett sat in silence, staring at the symbols that had changed their lives, a family's tragedy rewritten as a Cold War experiment. Outside, a drone hummed past the kitchen window, its camera eye fixed on the house. I remember something else, Everett said finally. In the White Room, between tests, Hayes was arguing with another officer. He said, if even one of them makes it back, the whole project is compromised. He looked at his daughter, his eyes haunted. I never had a chance of coming home to you, did I? June squeezed his hand. But you did, and now we know why. She gathered the flight log and envelope, adding them to her research files. We just need to figure out what happens next. No, Everett said firmly. We need to figure out what happened to the others. 7 pilots, 7 families who never knew the truth. He stood, straightening his shoulders like the military man he'd once been. I'm not their test subject anymore. I'm their witness. The library's microfilm reader hummed in the dim basement as June scrolled through decades-old newspapers. Her father dozed in a nearby chair, his breathing steady but shallow. She'd noticed he needed more rest lately, sometimes sleeping 14 hours at a stretch. The Silver City Daily Press from March 1959 yielded another piece. Local pilot missing in training exercise. Lieutenant Thomas Reed, age 32, vanished during a night flight. No wreckage found. The photo showed a man in an Air Force uniform smiling confidently at the camera. June added it to her growing collection. 7 cases between 1957 and 1959, all within a 100-mile radius of Silver Ridge, all involving experienced pilots, all classified as accidents or disappearances. Dad, she whispered, touching his arm. Look at this one. Everett stirred, blinking in the harsh fluorescent light. Tom Reed, he said immediately, studying the photograph. I knew him. We played cards at the VFW sometimes. His hand went unconsciously to his left shoulder, where a small geometric tattoo marked his skin. A souvenir from the White Room he still couldn't fully remember. June noticed the gesture. Show me again? Everett rolled up his sleeve. The mark was simple but precise. 3 interlocking triangles forming a pattern that seemed to shift if you stared too long. They all had one, he said quietly. Everyone who went into the chamber. June pulled out another article, this one, from 1984. Body found in Gila Wilderness identified as missing airman. The story was brief. Skeletal remains discovered by hikers, identified through dental records as Captain Michael Torres, who'd vanished during a routine patrol in 1958. But it was the medical examiner's photo that made her breath catch. There, visible on weathered bone, was the same triangular pattern, not tattooed, but somehow burned into the shoulder blade itself. Torres, Everett murmured. He disappeared 2 months before me, said he was doing high-altitude weather reconnaissance. He pressed his fingers against his temples. I'm starting to remember more. We weren't supposed to talk about the missions, but sometimes at the bar. He trailed off, lost in memory. What about the others? June spread out her notes. William Chen, Robert Martinez, James Kelly, David Peterson, and Mark Sullivan, all gone within 18 months. Chen was the first, Everett said. Related to your physicist friend, I think. The brass told us he crashed in bad weather, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. He leaned forward, studying the dates. Always on the new moon. How did I never notice that before? June was about to respond when her phone buzzed, a news alert. Popular science blogger found dead in home office. Her heart sank as she read further. Dr. Sarah Chen, 42, discovered by neighbors after failing to appear for a university lecture. Preliminary cause, natural causes. 3 days ago, June said, she posted a video about Project ArcLight, said she had proof it wasn't just theoretical research. She pulled up the blog, but the video was gone. The entire site had been scrubbed. They're still cleaning up loose ends, Everett said grimly. After all these years. June opened her laptop, grateful she'd downloaded everything. The video was raw footage. Dr. Chen speaking directly to camera, surrounded by papers and old photographs. This goes deeper than anyone realized, she was saying, holding up a yellow document. Project ArcLight wasn't just about temporal displacement. They were trying to create permanent corridors, spaces where time moved differently. The pilots weren't meant to return. They were meant to... The video stuttered, fragments of audio cutting in and out. Waiting for something. Coordinates suggest. Breach protocol. They're coming. The final frame showed her looking over her shoulder, startled by something off camera. Natural causes, June said bitterly, closing the laptop. Like all those heart attacks at the VFW after you came back. Everett had gone very still. Under the fluorescent lights, his outline seemed to waver slightly, like heat distortion on summer pavement. June blinked, but the effect persisted. Dad? I'm fine, he said, but his voice sounded distant. Just tired. These memories, they wear me out. June watched him carefully. The flickering had stopped, but his skin held an odd translucence. Maybe we should go home. They gathered their research and climbed the library steps into late afternoon sunshine. Everett moved slowly, as if walking through water. Twice he stopped, staring at nothing before shaking himself back to awareness. At home, June made coffee while Everett settled into his familiar chair. She'd set up a voice-activated recorder after noticing he talked in his sleep, hoping his unconscious mind might offer clues about the missing time. She didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, his head drooped and the mumbling began. But this wasn't English, or any language June recognized. The words seemed to fold in on themselves, consonants bending in impossible ways. She checked the recorder's levels, getting clear audio at least. Nkrath vol Shemming. Everett's voice was different too, deeper, resonant in a way that made the windows vibrate slightly. Temporal lock engaging. Subject 7. Holding pattern alpha. June sent a quick recording to a linguist friend at Boston University. The response came back almost immediately. What is this? Doesn't match any known language pattern. Some phonemes physically impossible for human vocal cords. Where did you get this? She watched her father sleep, his form flickering again under the kitchen lights. The coffee in her cup rippled with tiny concentric circles, though nothing had moved the table. The recorder was still running. Breach protocol initiated. Everett's voice had taken on a mechanical cadence. Temporal corridor unstable. Subjects 1 through 6. Terminal displacement achieved. His hands twitched. Subject 7. Return window compromised. Time. Folding. June reached for the recorder, but her hand passed through it. For a moment, the air itself seemed to bend, then everything snapped back to normal. Everett's eyes opened. How long was I out? About 20 minutes, June said, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't mention the language, the flickering, the way reality had momentarily warped around them. Do you remember dreaming? Something about flying, he said vaguely. Through clouds that weren't clouds. He rubbed his shoulder where the triangular mark burned dark against his skin. Did I say anything? June played back the recording. But now it contained only normal sleep sounds, breathing, the occasional murmur. The strange language had vanished, as if it had never existed. But when she checked her phone, the linguist's message was still there. Where did you get this? Call me immediately. Outside, a drone passed silently over the house. In the kitchen, coffee rippled in concentric circles, and somewhere in the desert night, time itself was beginning to bend. The recorder kept running, waiting for Everett to sleep again, waiting for the voice that spoke in impossible tongues, waiting for answers that might be better left unheard. June watched her father drift off once more, his outline wavering like a mirage. The triangular mark on his shoulder seemed to pulse in rhythm with his breathing, a beacon signaling to something beyond normal space and time. In the silence, she could almost hear the White Room calling. The desert dawn painted the Gila cliffs in shades of amber and rose. June's weathered Subaru bounced along an unmarked dirt track, following coordinates that hadn't appeared on any map since 1958. Beside her, Everett studied the envelope's contents, a series of numbers, and that strange quantum code now partially decoded. "Stop here," he said suddenly, pressing his hand against the dashboard. His fingers flickered slightly, becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying again. June pulled over, cutting the engine. They were deep in the wilderness now, surrounded by towering rock formations. No cell service, no radio signals, just the whisper of wind through desert sage. "This is it." Everett stepped out, orienting himself with movements that seemed both precise and oddly mechanical. "The approach vector matches my last flight path. We were meant to land here." June followed him toward what appeared to be a solid cliff face, but as they drew closer, she noticed subtle irregularities in the rock, straight lines too perfect to be natural, metal gleaming beneath decades of dust and oxidation. "There," Everett pointed to a narrow crevice. "That's the service entrance. The main hangar doors are—" He gestured upward, where massive steel panels had been artfully concealed within the cliff's natural striations. They squeezed through the crevice, flashlight beams revealing a concrete corridor beyond. The air was stale but breathable. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space were both larger and smaller than it appeared. "The power's still on," June observed, noting the faint hum of electricity. Emergency lights cast a sickly green glow along the walls, their backup systems somehow functioning after 60 years of abandonment. They passed through a security checkpoint, its gate long since rusted open. Everett paused at a faded warning sign. "Project Arclight. Temporal security protocols in effect." Below it, someone had scratched a message. "God help us all." The corridor opened into a vast chamber carved directly into the rock. June's flashlight beam caught something that made her gasp. Aircraft, dozens of them, arranged in neat rows. But these weren't just from the 1950s. She recognized designs spanning decades. A WW P-51 Mustang, a Vietnam-era Phantom, even what appeared to be an experimental drone from the 1990s. "They're all intact," she whispered. "No crash damage." "Because they didn't crash," Everett said quietly. "They arrived." His hand trembled as he touched the nearest fuselage, just like I was supposed to. They moved deeper into the facility. Medical equipment lined the walls, examination tables fitted with heavy restraints, diagnostic machines whose purposes June couldn't begin to guess. And everywhere, that persistent hum of power, like a heartbeat buried in stone. A metal door marked "Subject Containment" stood partially open. Inside, 7 cylindrical pods were arranged in a semicircle, their frosted glass surfaces covered in complex mathematical formulas. 6 were empty. The 7th was shattered, its interior coated with a crystalline residue that seemed to bend light around it. "This is where they kept us," Everett said. His voice had taken on that mechanical quality again. "Between flights, between times." He approached the broken pod, his outline wavering. "Pod 7, my pod." June examined the control panel beside each chamber. The display still functioned, showing incomprehensible strings of numbers and symbols matching those from the envelope. What were they doing here? "Creating corridors," Everett replied, using Dr. Chen's words. "Spaces where time moved differently. We weren't just test pilots, we were anchors." He pressed his hand against Pod 7's fractured surface. They needed human consciousness to stabilize the temporal breaches, to hold them open. For what? Before he could answer, they heard it, a low thrumming from deeper within the facility. Not mechanical, almost organic, like the sound of vast wings beating against the walls of reality itself. They followed the noise to a circular chamber dominated by a massive screen. Star charts and trajectories flickered across its surface, updating in real time. But these weren't normal celestial movements. The pattern suggested something else, tears in space-time, spreading like cracks in glass. "The envelope," Everett said suddenly. "The coordinates weren't for this facility. They're showing where the corridors lead. He studied the screen, his expression growing horrified. They're all still active. All 6 of them. Tom, Michael, William, Robert, James, David. They're still out there, holding the breaches open. But you came back, June said. You broke the pattern. Not broke, shattered. He touched his temple where a trickle of blood had begun to flow. They didn't expect that, didn't plan for it. Movement caught June's eye. Along one curved wall, hundreds of names had been meticulously engraved in neat columns. She recognized some from her research. Pilots, scientists, military personnel, all vanished, all erased from official records. Everett found his own name near the bottom of the list. The engraving was precise, clinical. Subject 7, Granger E. Temporal Anchor Point Gamma. But it was the last name that made June's blood run cold. Freshly scratched into the metal, the letters still sharp and bright. Chen, S. Containment breach, terminated. The hum grew louder. Somewhere in the facility, metal groaned as ancient machinery stirred to life. The screen's pattern shifted, showing new trajectories, new ruptures spreading across the fabric of space-time. Dad? June reached for Everett's hand, but her fingers passed through his momentarily transparent flesh. What's happening? They're waking up, he whispered. All of them. The anchors, the corridors. Blood continued to trickle from his nose, his ears. They're calling us home. The facility's lights pulsed in rhythm with that otherworldly thrumming. In the distance, heavy doors began to cycle open. The sound of wings grew louder, closer, beating against the thinning walls of reality. On the massive screen, 6 points of light pulsed in perfect synchronization. The 7th, Everett's breach, flickered erratically, its instability sending ripples through the others. Warning messages flashed across the display in that same impossible language he had spoken in his sleep. June stared at the wall of names, at Dr. Chen's final warning scratched into living rock. The truth she had spent a lifetime seeking was here, carved into the bones of a mountain, humming with power that never should have been harnessed. Her father stood beside her, his form wavering between moments, between times. Blood dripped from his chin, each drop hanging suspended in air before vanishing into nothing. The beating of vast wings echoed through the facility's corridors, drawing closer with each passing second. The thrumming grew stronger, vibrating through the facility's metal walkways. June steadied herself against a wall as Everett moved deeper into the chamber, drawn to something she couldn't see. His movements were mechanical now, as if guided by muscle memory from 60 years ago. There's another room, he said, his voice distant. Behind this panel. June followed his flashlight beam to a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. A control panel was set into the rock, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust except for a familiar symbol, a bisected circle with angular wings, the Arclight insignia she'd seen in her father's flight logs. Dad, wait! But Everett was already moving toward it, his hand outstretched. The closer he got, the more his outline seemed to blur, like a photograph going out of focus. I remember this, he murmured. They made us practice the sequence, over and over, until we could do it in our sleep. His fingers traced the symbol, leaving trails in the dust, until it became part of us. We should go, June said. The facility's hum had changed pitch, becoming higher, more urgent. Something's not right. Everett placed his palm flat against the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then light bloomed beneath his hand, soft at first, then brilliant. The panel's surface came alive with pulsing blue circuits, spreading outward like frost across glass. A mechanical voice echoed through hidden speakers. Temporal anchor recognized, initiating re-entry protocol. No, Everett whispered. He tried to pull his hand away, but it seemed fused to the panel. No, this isn't. The screen above them flashed red. Re-entry initiated. Numbers began counting down from 60 minutes. The facility's lights shifted from green to crimson. Klaxons wailed. The sound of machinery powering up rolled through the complex like thunder. We have to get out. June grabbed her father's arm, finally breaking his connection to the panel. Now! They ran. The corridors that had seemed so empty before were now alive with movement. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision. The air itself felt charged, making their skin tingle and their hair stand on end. Behind them, metal groaned as pressure doors began cycling shut. The countdown's rhythm matched their pounding footsteps. 58 minutes, 57, 56. They reached the hangar chamber. The aircraft were different now, their surfaces rippling like heat mirages, cockpits filled with strange lights. June could have sworn she saw movement inside them, shadowy figures at the controls. A high-pitched whine cut through the chaos. Something dark detached itself from the ceiling, a drone, but unlike any June had seen before. Its surface was non-reflective black, its shape somehow wrong, as if it existed at odd angles to reality. "Down!" Everett pulled June behind a workbench as the drone opened fire. Not bullets, pulses of energy that left scorch marks in the concrete. "The service entrance," June gasped. "It's our only way out." They ran in a crouch, using the aircraft for cover. The drone followed, its targeting sensors painting red dots across their backs. Each blast came closer than the last. 52 minutes. They reached the security checkpoint. The gate that had been rusted open was now sliding closed, driven by ancient hydraulics somehow restored to life. June dove through first. Everett followed, his jacket catching on the metal. He pulled free just as the gate slammed shut with enough force to shake the walls. The drone smashed against the bars, its chassis splitting open to reveal components that looked more organic than mechanical. It reformed itself, becoming narrower, and began squeezing through the gap. 49 minutes. The concrete corridor felt longer now, the air thicker. June's lungs burned as they ran. Behind them, the drone's whine grew closer. Another energy pulse struck the wall beside her head, showering her with hot fragments. "Almost there," Everett called. The service entrance was visible ahead, a rectangle of desert twilight cut into stone. June was 3 steps from freedom when her foot caught on an exposed pipe. She went down hard, her ankle twisting with a sickening pop. Pain shot up her leg like lightning. The drone was on them in seconds, energy weapons charging for a killing shot. But Everett moved faster than seemed possible, placing himself between June and the machine. His outline blurred again, and for a moment he seemed to exist in multiple places at once. The drone's sensors flickered, confused by whatever temporal distortions surrounded Everett. It hesitated just long enough for him to grab a loose piece of rebar and swing it like a baseball bat. The impact sent the drone spiraling into a wall, its systems shorting out in a shower of sparks. 45 minutes. "I've got you," Everett said, lifting June into his arms. She bit back a cry as her injured ankle jostled. "Hold on tight." He carried her through the entrance and into the deepening twilight. The canyon walls glowed red in the setting sun, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Behind them, more klaxons joined the chorus. The facility's hum had become a physical presence, making the ground vibrate beneath Everett's feet. They were halfway to the car when June saw it, another drone, larger than the first, rising above the cliff edge. Its surface rippled with that same wrong-angle geometry. As it oriented toward them, she glimpsed what looked like a cockpit. Inside was a figure that couldn't possibly be human. 42 minutes. Everett ran faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. June clung to him, feeling the strange fluctuations in his physical form. One moment he was solid, the next almost transparent. Blood trickled steadily from his nose now, spattering her sleeve. The drone followed, keeping pace but not attacking. Observing, waiting. They reached the car just as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the canyon into premature darkness. June fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking as Everett helped her into the passenger seat. The facility's lights pulsed behind them, visible now through cracks appearing in the cliff face. The sound of vast wings grew louder, accompanied by a high-pitched keening that made June's teeth ache. Everett slid behind the wheel, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. More blood ran from his ears, his eyes. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from very far away. "It's not just about me," he whispered, starting the engine. "They're coming through." The drone hovered above them, its shadow falling across the windshield like a judgment. The countdown continued in June's head, 40 minutes until whatever was waiting on the other side of those temporal corridors broke free. The drive back to Silver Ridge took forever, each mile marked by Everett's increasingly erratic behavior. He would fade in and out of focus, his hands passing through the steering wheel before becoming solid again. June kept pressure on her swollen ankle, watching the desert darkness through pain-blurred eyes. "The community radio station," Everett said suddenly, his voice oscillating between frequencies like a badly tuned radio. "KSDG, it's still there?" "Yes, but—" "Good." He pressed harder on the accelerator. "People need to know. All of it." They passed the town limit sign at 11:42 p.m. Silver Ridge hadn't changed much since 1958. Same dusty main street, same adobe buildings with their peeling paint. The radio station occupied a small building near the center of town, its transmission tower a skeletal finger against the star-filled sky. Everett parked crookedly across two spaces. When he helped June from the car, she noticed his footsteps left. Brief after-images on the pavement, like heat mirages in reverse. "You're getting worse," she said. He nodded, wiping blood from his upper lip. "Whatever they did to me, whatever kept me in that place, it's wearing off, but there's time enough for this." The station's night DJ, a college kid with worried eyes, looked up as they burst through the door. He started to speak, but something in Everett's expression made him stop. "Sir, you can't—" Everett moved with military precision, despite his deteriorating condition. He locked the door, then gestured at the broadcasting equipment. "Show me how to override the automated playlist." The DJ glanced between them, taking in June's dirt-streaked clothes and Everett's bloody nose. "I'll call security." "Please," June said. "People need to hear this." Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Maybe it was the way Everett's outline kept blurring. Whatever the reason, the DJ nodded slowly. "The override switch is here," he said, pointing to a red button. "The mic will go live immediately." Everett sat down at the console, adjusting the microphone with the ease of someone who'd spent countless hours in cockpits. His hands passed through the equipment twice before settling into solidity. "This is Captain Everett Granger," he began, his voice steady despite the blood now dripping steadily onto his collar. "Some of you might remember me. I disappeared from Silver Ridge Airport on July 18, 1958. What follows is the truth about what happened that day, and what's happening now." He told everything. The secret military program recruiting pilots for experimental flights, the envelope containing quantum coordinates, the facility hidden in the Gila Cliffs where time itself had been weaponized. "They called it Project Arclight," he continued. "We weren't delivering cargo. We were test subjects. They needed pilots who could navigate through temporal distortions, who could survive in places where time doesn't flow normally. Some of us didn't make it back. Some of us were never meant to." June watched the police scanner as Everett spoke. Already there were reports of military vehicles being spotted on the highway from Las Cruces. They didn't have much time. "The coordinates are 32D4719 N 108DG16 42.1 W, Everett said clearly. "That's where you'll find the truth. That's where you'll find evidence of every pilot they took. Richard Martinez, Samuel Cooper, Elena Rodriguez, Thomas Chen." He listed 24 names, each one accompanied by a date of disappearance. The DJ's phone started ringing, then the station's landline, then June's cell phone. Calls were coming in from all over town. "There's something in the sky," one caller reported. "Like heat lightning, but it's not moving right." "I can hear voices on my radio," said another. "Old voices. They're talking about flight patterns and weather conditions from decades ago." Everett's nose was bleeding freely now, staining the microphone red. His voice began to skip and stutter like a record with scratches. "They're coming through, the ones they left on the other side. The ones who've been waiting all these years in the spaces between seconds." Through the station's window, June saw military Humvees rolling down Main Street. Men in dark uniforms were deploying what looked like scientific equipment on the sidewalks. "Dad," she whispered, "we need to go." But Everett wasn't finished. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his original flight plan from 1958. "This document proves the military knew what they were doing. They knew the risks. They knew some of us would never come back. But they did it anyway because they thought they could control time itself." The building's lights flickered. Static crackled through every speaker. Outside, car alarms began wailing in dissonant chorus. "Listen to me," Everett said urgently. "If you hear this, if you know someone who disappeared like I did, don't let them bury the truth again. Don't let them—" His hand passed through the microphone completely. When it reformed, his fingers had changed position slightly, as if several seconds had been skipped. June's phone exploded with messages. Videos were being uploaded showing strange atmospheric disturbances above Silver Ridge. The sky itself seemed to be folding in places, creating patterns that hurt the eyes. Military personnel were at the station's door now, trying to break it down. The DJ had retreated to a corner, filming everything on his phone with shaking hands. Everett stood up, his movements jerky and discontinuous. "I have to go back," he said, looking at June with eyes that were somehow both young and ancient. "I started this. I have to finish it. Dad, no. The facility is calling me. I can feel it. Whatever's trying to come through, whatever they created back then, I'm still connected to it. He touched her face with a hand that felt like static electricity. I'm sorry I missed watching you grow up. I'm sorry I left you alone. The door burst open. Men in tactical gear poured in, raising weapons that looked more like scientific instruments than guns. But Everett was already moving past them, his form flickering between spaces faster than they could track. I started this, he called back to June. I have to finish it. Then he was gone, leaving only bloody footprints that seemed to fade in and out of existence, leading back toward the facility that had stolen him once before. Through the station's open door, June could hear the town coming alive with impossible sounds, phantom engine noises from planes long gone, radio chatter from decades past, and above it all, the high, thin whine of something vast moving through layers of reality that were never meant to touch. The fluorescent lights in Silver Ridge Memorial Hospital buzzed with an irregular rhythm that made June's head ache. 3 days had passed since the radio broadcast, since her father had walked out of that station and disappeared. Again, this time perhaps forever. Her ankle, wrapped in clean white gauze, throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Outside her third-floor window, military vehicles still patrolled the streets. Teams in hazmat suits took readings with strange equipment, their movements careful and coordinated. The town itself seemed suspended in an uneasy quiet, like the pause between lightning and thunder. A young nurse, Katie, according to her name tag, came in to check June's vitals. "There's someone here to see you," she said softly. "Says he's from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations." June's hands tightened on the blanket. "Tell him I'm not. He has something for you." Katie hesitated. "Something from your father." The man who entered wore civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. His face was kind, almost apologetic, as he placed a small tablet computer on June's bedside table. "This was recovered from the facility ruins," he said. "Captain Granger recorded it shortly before—" He trailed off, clearing his throat. "We've verified its authenticity. Given your family connection, we felt you should see it first." June's fingers trembled as she reached for the tablet. The screen flickered to life, showing a dimly lit room with concrete walls. Everett sat in frame, his face illuminated by emergency lighting. Blood stained his collar, and his outlines seemed to shift and blur at the edges. "June," he began, his voice distorted by static. "If you're watching this, I've already gone back to the facility. There's so much I need to tell you. So much you need to understand about what really happened." The timestamp in the corner showed 2:17 a.m., less than an hour after he'd left the radio station. Project Arclight wasn't just about experimental aircraft or secret weapons, Everett continued. They were trying to weaponize time itself. The envelope I carried that day contained coordinates, not for places, but for moments. Points where the fabric of time was thin enough to pierce. He paused, wiping blood from his nose. They recruited pilots who could handle the psychological strain of temporal displacement. We weren't just flying through air. We were flying through years, through decades. Some of us got lost. Some of us found things out there that weren't meant to be found. June watched as her father's image flickered, splitting into multiple versions before resolving again. Behind him, shadows moved in impossible ways. The facility was an anchor point, a place where different time streams converged. They thought they could control it, use it to give America an advantage in the Cold War. But time, he laughed, a hollow sound. Time isn't something you can control. It's like trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. The image quality degraded further. Everett's voice became choppy, words cutting in and out. The others, still out there, between moments, trying to get back. June leaned forward, straining to hear. The military observer stood silently by the door, his expression unreadable. "That day in 1958, Everett continued, something went wrong. The temporal corridor collapsed while I was inside it. I spent 61 years in a place where time doesn't exist, a void between seconds. But I wasn't alone there. Others were trapped too, floating in that endless moment. And now..." Static overtook the image completely for several seconds. When it cleared, Everett was standing, his movements jittery and unnatural. "They're following me back through, June. All of them. The lost pilots, the broken machines, The fragments of time we shattered. The facility is pulling everything in, like a black hole made of memories and moments. I have to close it. Have to end what we started. The video began to break up more frequently. June could see strange lights moving behind her father, could hear voices speaking in languages that hurt her ears. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, Everett said, his image starting to fade. Sorry I had to leave you twice. But some doors, once opened. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes full of both love and resignation. Keep watching the sky, June. It never really... The video cut to black. June sat in silence for a long moment, tears rolling down her cheeks. The military observer shifted uncomfortably. The facility? She asked finally. Completely destroyed, he replied. We found it collapsed in on itself yesterday morning. The readings we're getting, well, they don't make sense. It's as if that entire section of the canyon simply stopped existing in normal space-time. And my father? The man shook his head. No body was recovered. Given the nature of the temporal anomalies involved, we may never know exactly what happened. June nodded slowly, her throat tight. Thank you for bringing this to me. After the observer left, June spent hours staring out her window at the New Mexico sky. It looked normal now, just endless blue stretched over red rocks and sage. But sometimes, when she watched long enough, she thought she could see something moving up there, like heat waves that bent in impossible directions. 3 weeks later, she received a call from a park ranger. A boy hiking in the Gila wilderness, miles from the facility site, had found something in a strange, circular depression in the ground. A pilot's watch, its face cracked but still keeping perfect time. The serial number matched her father's service record. June had it sent to her home in Boston, where it sat ticking on her bedside table. Sometimes late at night, she swore its hands moved backward for brief moments, marking time in both directions at once. On the morning she was finally discharged from the hospital, June asked her nurse to wheel her out to the hospital's small garden. The military presence in Silver Ridge had finally begun to withdraw, though occasional unmarked vehicles still passed through town. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of desert sage. June tilted her head back, looking up at the vast expanse above. Somewhere in that blue void, she knew, there were spaces between moments where lost pilots still flew, where time itself had been wounded by human ambition, where her father had gone to seal a breach that should never have been opened. It never really closed, did it? She whispered to the empty sky. The only answer was the wind, carrying echoes of propeller sounds that might have been memory, or might have been something else entirely. The ghostly engines of planes still flying through the spaces between seconds, searching for a way home.